year, I graduated from the 8th grade. But then a little later, Sis didn't want to go to school. She wanted me to go with her. So our teacher got me high school books, and I went back to school at high school.
How far apart are you and Sis? How much younger is she?
Well, I should mention that I had a sister, Henrietta, born in 1926, and a brother, Lester, was born in 1915.
And you...
So the brother was older, and my sister was younger.
And didn't you have trouble when you were born?
Yeah.
You almost died?
No.
Oh, no?
No death.
Well, was it Grandma that was... I thought there was something that happened when you were first born.
No.
Okay, guess I got that wrong.
The only thing, when I was born, my mother had the flu, which was prevalent at the time. And so I was born with the flu. And then I got pneumonia. And I could remember that we had the doctor, my mother had the doctor and had an intern by the name of Hediger. And so Hediger was our doctor later on, and he'd often say, if it wouldn't have been for me, you wouldn't be here. So anyhow, they said that the babies did concentrate on the mother, but Hediger and my grandma, they worked with me and they saw me move my hand. And anyhow, they brought me out of it. And see, that's where I'm getting things all mixed up.
Well, can you tell us who your parents were and grandparents when they came over from Europe?
Well, my dad was Henry Strotheide, and my mother was Louise Neumann. And Dad, I can't tell you too much about on my mother's side, although I do have the literature. But my dad his dad was Rudolph Strotheide, and Rudolph was one of the boys originally when they left Europe. The mother, he had broken his leg. The dad had broken his leg, and my great-grandma, Sophie Strotheide, she took the 3 boys and came over here, and she had a sister living in Breeze, and I can't, in the top of my head, I can't think of it. And anyhow, she had a sister that went to Kansas, Biggie. I knew that big. And my grandpa had 4 girls and 2 boys. And the boy, Otto, he had Henry with my dad. And then there was Sophie, Dina, and Bertha, and Susan. Girls. And after I graduated, I helped Dad on the farm, a dairy farm, and we also had wheat and corn and oats and soybeans, and we did a lot of milking. And when as time went by, the draft was coming around, and I was 22, and so I told Mom that I was going to take out leave. And so Dad come over to me and he said, Mom says you're going to leave. He said, I'd rather you didn't, but how much money you got? And I showed him I had $20. And he said, that won't get you very far. So he reached back in his billfold and he got another 20, give me another 20. And I rode with the milk hauler, Heidi Reinhardt, down to St. Louis. And then I hitchhiked with a couple going to St. Charles, and I got out of the highway and I was thumbing, and here come a cattle truck. And he was from up north to El Paso. There's a route goes through there, and he said, a lot of these caravans driving one and towing one are coming by, and he says, once in a while the driver isn't too good, they need a new driver. So we gets up there, and he let me out by the restaurant. I went in and ate, and it's good evening now. And I came outside, and I held up my thumb, and I heard that car screech. Here was one of them caravans. And he says, can you drive? And I says, yeah, I can drive. He said, get behind the wheel. So I get behind the wheel and drove the rest of the way. And that evening at Shelbida, Missouri, the whole group got together. About, I think there was about 8 drivers, 16, 17 cars. And the boss come over and he said, say so-and-so tells me you're a good driver. He said, I need somebody going to Los Angeles. And I thought, oh God, to Los Angeles. He said, yeah, I'll feed you and put you up in a bed, our room. So we got to Colorado, and we had a layover one whole day, and they fixed up the hitches and stuff on the cars, and some law or something. Whenever you went from one state to the other, you had to register. You had to drive in a registering place to let them know because we was driving a car and towing one. But we got I should have told you this, we got to Kansas, and the gas was about 15 cents a gallon. But you get into Arizona, and it's up to about twice as much, a little bit more. So we drained that car we were towing and poured it in the car that we was driving. In fact, you might go out there in the cactus and find the buckets and funnels that we had. It's called it saved a little bit on the gas. And we get to Los Angeles, and this guy that I had met earlier, that took me for driving, and he talked me into going to Tinsley, Wyoming. And we gets out there, and the boss says, well, you did a good job. And he said, here's your ticket to get back to Detroit if you want to go back and drive again or something. But anyhow, he would have paid, but I said, no, I'm going with Slim. He's going up into Wyoming. I want to go up to Wyoming. And me and Slim had to go down to the railroad yard in Los Angeles and pick out a train that's getting ready to go north towards Cheyenne. And you get in there and you talk to, we called them bulls at the time, the cops. And we asked him, and they said, get the hell out of here, you know. And when he went by, he motioned like, oh, this is it. So we took him for granted that he was telling us. And we got out of there, and then we had a flat wheel. That boom, boom, boom. You wonder what the heck am I doing here, you know? And it took us maybe a couple of weeks to ride the freight train, going up into Tinsley. Well, up from, we got to Cheyenne, and we got into Cheyenne, and so you can see Cheyenne a long ways away before you get there on the freight train. And so anyhow, he said the bulls are pretty bad here in Cheyenne, so get off as soon as we can. And the train is starting to slow down. So I got a big old suitcase, and I come down the side of the car, and the train car, and he said, don't jump. And I thought he said jump, and I jumped and hit one of these switch places where they switch the tracks, and it threw me back underneath it. Train, just lucky the damn wheel didn't get me. And but I was all bruised up, and here he comes back. He called my name. And so we stayed there at Cheyenne. The next morning we caught the train going northern Wyoming. And we went into Hyattville. And they went up to the tavern, and people in there they're making hay. They're looking for workers. So we got up we got up there, we made hay for about a week or something like that. And Slim, he was supposed to be going up there to irrigate, but he said, I'll work with you on the hay. And after a week, he said, I can't take too much of this. So he said, let's go back to Thermopolis. We had went through Thermopolis, but they call it, that's a place, a spring, where the Indians used to come, was medicine, like. And so they have what they call the star plunge, like a swimming pool. And we went in there and went swimming, and it refreshed us. So anyhow, after a week of making hay, we go back to the star plunge and get freshened up. But we went out to the shopping mall, and here was an old lady. And she said, I don't know what we're going to do. We got all that hay to make. And Ed had that tick fever. He's not able to do it. And so Slim next door to me, he says, we'll help you out. And so she said, oh, good. And so she said, I'll get my husband. We'll go get something to eat and head out for the ranch. He said, well, I can't go. He said, I'm involved in the Army. Because he was about 10 years older than I was. And he had been in the Navy, and him and his wife had troubles. And so he says, I can't go. I got to go get my mail, see where I'm sent. And you know who made the hay? I made the hay out of that for about 2 weeks. And then I got done with the hay making, and I thought, well, I'm going to head for the timber country in Montana. And there were a lot of work going up in there. And I got up into Cody, Wyoming, and I went out to see about work at where they had where you look for work. And they hired me to go up into the, but I've got a little, there, I should have told you about this, about before at the other place where I went, where I worked. The Indians had just left, and the homesteaders had come in.
Okay.
And you go into these caves, and they have all kind of pictures on the walls. These Indian ladies had put up there, and so we was right in that area where you could fish, and where the Indians had, you could see their tent poles is still there in the tents. They just let go, they moved them all to the reservation or somewhere.
Right.
And anyhow, we got, I got there, had a job up in Wyoming at Yellowstone, and here comes a guy by, and he says, hey, I need somebody to help me out the ranch. And anyhow, he talked me into going with him. And he said, as we're going on out, he says, I'm running a dude ranch. And he says that, well, it was a lot of young people came out, young boys. And so I got out there, and that's when I made a little hay, but mostly taking the people, the guests, for rides, trail rides, through the outback, out shivers, and I stayed there until September or so, and the snow started coming. And my brother in northern Illinois, he says, come back. He said, I got a lot of work up here, Flanagan. He said, so I went back and I worked for him until Thanksgiving. And then one night, here's Neumann. And you knew Norman.
Yes.
But anyhow, he's knocking on the door. He said, they're hired in California. Let's get out. Let's go. And so I went in for that old band that I worked for, the drive to California. And I called them. And they said, yeah, God need you. And then I mentioned about Norman. Oh, no, I can't hire him. He's not of age.
Oh, yeah.
So the secretary says, there's an old man been looking for drivers to go to Tucson, Arizona. And so she gave me the phone number, and he said, come on out. I went out and talked to him, and he hired us to take him to. We come down through Illinois and went across Texas, and I could remember him. Instead of a culvert, they had a dip in the road for the water to run across, and you'd hit that, you know. But he learned how you could go on this side of the road, go through a scantywampus, wasn't such a hump.
Right, right,
And I think we had a new Oldsmobile,
yeah.
and we got into Tucson, and there was no work. We stayed there a couple of days, but in the meantime, the folks that sent my car, draft cars, and in the apartment where I stayed, there was a guy that was a Navy recruiter, and he said, "You don't want to go in the Army." He said, "Join the Navy." So me and Norman joined the Navy, but then his folks wouldn't sign the papers,
Right,
and he couldn't get in because he was. But I went in, and so then they said, "Stick around the area, don't leave unless you let us know where you're going."
yeah.
So we're going broke, and I even thought about taking a brick and throwing it through the window so they'd arrest me and give me something to eat.
Yeah,
And there was two things to do. You could either pick cotton or work on the railroad. So I decided to work on the railroad.
I think that's a good choice.
And so they said it's over in Lawrenceburg, New Mexico. And the guy that rode with me going up there, he said, "Be sure you get a pack of cigarettes, because where we're going, we might not be able to even buy cigarettes." And he told me that he was from Folsom. He was in the prison there in California during the Red Riot. But it turned out he was pretty good. He was like a buddy, you know. He joined the cooks in this ranch. I mean, at the camp. And we'd play cards of a night in our tent, and they'd come along, and he'd bring the coffee pot and set it on the stove. So we had coffee to drink when we played cards. And then finally they sent me notice the bus will be by to pick me up and take me to boot camp in San Diego. And I went into San Diego, and, but while I was still working on the railroad, the Pearl Harbor had happened. And we couldn't work on the railroad because one train after another coming through, loaded with troops, because they thought the Japanese was coming into the United States. And they were sending troops, and you wouldn't believe I'm in Lawrenceburg, and they're coming from all over to get to California in case the Japanese wanted to come in. And anyhow, then a week after or so, I was in boot camp in San Diego, and I spent maybe only 2 weeks. I'm not sure. I spent 3 weeks, and they signed me to a ship going into Alaska. Well, first I had it for a few days. I was on the Tatnuck, which is a tug in the Puget Sound, and you'd think it would be pretty good duty. But every time a ship come in, we'd have to get out there and show him to his dock.
Right.
And so any time you could get called anytime during the night. But finally then I got assigned to the St. Mihiel, and we went up to the Skagway, Alaska, and we took the troops up there building the highway and bringing supplies up there because they was afraid of the Japanese coming in there, and they was getting the camps was being built all over. And then it came a little bit later. We were going up with a bunch of troops to Dutch Harbor, and we got word to take them to Kodak Island, off Alaska, and to stand by until find out what happened with the Japs bombing Dutch Harbor. And then finally they told us we could go on in, and we loaded up with more fuel and more troops, and we headed into Dutch Harbor. And we got into Dutch Harbor, and the civilians, they were all over waiting at the docks, wanting to get on. They wanted to go back. Their contract expired as soon as there was a war going on. And so we brought these civilians back to the States and loaded up with Seabees, Navy construction. the first Seabees that we knew about, we loaded them up and taken them up into Dutch Harbor, and then you could go up there. You see them Seabees on the roof, putting roofing on and everything, doing that type of work. And then every time we'd come up, they'd bomb us. They'd come over bombing us. So we had knew that they told us that they had built 2 airports, brought in a lot of troops in Alaska, and they had it at Attu and Kiska. Attu and Kiska. And so then about 2 weeks later, or sometime later on, they had us all get together and get ready for an invasion of Attu. Got to get rid of them Japs. So we went in at 2 o'clock in the morning. We went in there, and I was a radar operator all this time, and which is a pretty rough little job too, because you sat there in the dark watching that screen for other ships and planes, and so I'll tell you this later. But anyhow, we made the invasion, and it was a rough way to go. So finally, the Japs took over the Army hospital, and they brought the hospital on our ship. And these wounded would come in, and we'd have to take care of them on board ship. And the biggest part of them had frozen fingers and hands. They came out of California in khaki, and they needed wool up in there, dressed in wool. And they froze themselves. And the ship was stinking from that damn kids freezing their feet. But the war was pretty rough, and then it turned out that they either killed them, the Japanese, or took them as prisoners of war. The ones I saw was POWs. But they brought all them wounded on, they'd come in all day long, and then on the morning you'd send the bodies back, and I guess they buried them in mass grave or something. But our boys. But they brought the Japanese. We finally had to go to Adak and pick up some of the old timers, and we're coming up there with the old timers, and they said, "What the hell?" They said, "These guys out of California." When here we was up there 3-4 years getting adjusted to the temperature and everything, and so they had beards, long beards, and I actually, you won't believe this, but I saw a poker game going on, and the guy took about $500 and he threw it in the water. He said, "Might as well throw that and get rid of that," because they took him for so much money. They made money, you go up there, no place to spend it, you make them money. Mm-hmm. They had the money, it was coming pretty easy. And they come on, wasn't too long, the war was over then. But then about a month later, the Japanese were still bombing us going up. So they got to get rid of that one at Kiska. And that's where the guy, we eat together now. We're here, he's in here too. And he was in on that invasion, not the first one at Attu, but at Kiska. And he would come in, and he was on the LSTs and brought the troop right in, where I was on the guns on board the ship. And all night long, we come in about 2 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden, no Japs. Our boys were shooting one another. The Japs were all gone. We had drove all them Japanese out. They come and got ships and planes and loaded them Japanese and took them back to, well, I shouldn't say they went back to Japan, because I got a different, we come back to the States after this, we drove all the Japanese out, and we go into San Francisco, not Seattle. We went back to San Francisco, loaded up with colored sailors, going over to Pearl Harbor. That's where we wanted duty in Pearl Harbor. Here we taking them boys back, going over there. And then we went through the canal and going to decommission the ship. Went through the canal and come on around to when I went to Cuba. We came into Cuba there, and then we went to Boston, decommissioned the ship there. But in the meantime, they was building a new ship, the Butner, in Baltimore. And so I helped him get supplies on that the Butner, for the rafts and for the lifeboats, and anyhow, I'm listed in our reunion book that I was one of the read to. And we went through Chesapeake Bay on just shakedown, and then they sent us on to Casablanca. You know where that is, up in Casablanca, North Africa. And we went into, let's see, that's sort of, anyhow, we took a load of GIs up there, and then we loaded up with Italian and German soldiers, POWs, brought them back, and I think they settled in Iowa, because I read where they had had a reunion or something. The people that lived there and these Italians and Germans got acquainted, I guess, and intertwined the community. But we did two trips up there, and then we was making the third trip, and they says, well, we didn't announce this before, but we're heading for Bombay, India. And these are a bunch of cavalry. They're going to catch the train down to China, because the Japanese was down there close to the South Pacific, and China around there was where the cavalry come in and could do some good. And we got aboard ship. I think it was 17 days we didn't see a bit of land. Went through Cape Town, and then on up the coast, and then into Bombay. And that's also, by the way, is the gateway to India is at Bombay. And if you've heard of the Taj Mahal, it's at Agra. And that's about 1,000 miles from Bombay. And so we loaded up with troops there, and we unloaded troops, and then I think we went into Australia and got troops. But in the meantime, we also loaded a load of Chinese naval cadets coming back to the States to be trained or learned or taught. And we went into Australia. In fact, we had a home port besides Bombay. Melbourne, Australia was one of our main home ports. We spent a lot of time in Melbourne and Bombay. In fact, one day down at the beach, there was a bunch of boys running around there, and a couple of them looked like us. And I says, you don't look like one of these Indians. What are you? He said, I'm a goddamn Jew. But we found that out. Whenever you go to a foreign country, go to a jewelry store. It's usually a jeweler running it, and they usually can speak English. And that's where we could kind of connect with them wherever we went. And we made a lot of trips on Australia to hold a lot of guys on Australia and fight our Japanese. And then we came back and we went to invasion of the Philippines. And we were down there on invading the Philippines. And then while we're down there, we get a notice that the war was over in Germany and the POWs wanted to come home. So they sent us back. We went through the Canal a second time. And went on over to La Havre, France. And in La Havre, we picked up a whole bunch. a whole group of POWs, and they we usually hold about 5 or 6,000, but we had 12,000 POWs bring it back because they wanted to get back, and half of them would sleep in the daytime and half at night because they were going home. So we brought them back here, and then in the meantime instead of I got away from the radar on the new ship. I had 1.1 anti-aircraft gun, and I got back at the give me shore duty, and I went to Northern Oklahoma the last few days. I think the war in Japan was over. In 1945, and I was down there in Northern Oklahoma. But my buddy, he worked around in Japan after the bombing, and he said he was in the middle of war, all that nuclear stuff, and now every once in a while he's got trouble with, he had a big, what do you call it, when a sword gets infected, anyhow they had to dig it out, and then they put flesh off of here and they put it up in here, and it looks pretty good. But then he started having back in here, and he said it's all from the nuclear Japan. Just imagine how many over there were. And now they're talking again, this nuclear big deal. And I thought they want to extinguish the whole world. Get rid of everybody, I guess. Because that's the biggest trouble, there's too many people.
Dad, we're gonna let you take a break, I think.
Wow.
We'll take a break. You've been talking a lot. We're gonna stop for a minute.
Yeah, we'll start out after we get out, after I got discharged.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.